Remove that medal immediately. This is my courtroom, not a ceremony. The judge's voice thundered across the silent chamber as every eye turned to the decorated fire captain standing proud. The silence that followed was deafening. Captain Michael Torres stood motionless in the center of the mahogany-paneled courtroom, his broad shoulders filling out the deep crimson dress uniform of the Metropolitan Fire Department. At 6'2", he commanded presence without trying, the kind of man who'd carried unconscious victims from burning buildings and never spoke about it afterward. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, his trimmed beard following regulation lines, and his black leather gloves were clasped respectfully behind his back. But it was the metal pinned to his chest that had drawn the judge's ire. The fire service cross gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a bronze cross with red enamel, suspended from a ribbon of deep blue and gold. It was the highest decoration for valor in the fire service, awarded only to those who had risked their lives beyond the call of duty. Torres had earned it 3 years ago when he'd refused to abandon a collapsing warehouse, staying behind to ensure every civilian was evacuated while the roof fell around him. He wasn't here for himself today. He'd come to support Maria Santos, the widow of his former partner, Lieutenant Carlos Santos, who had died in the line of duty 2 years ago. The city was fighting her death benefits claim, arguing her husband's heart attack during a 4-alarm fire wasn't service-related. It was bureaucratic cruelty at its worst, and Torres couldn't stomach letting her face it alone. Judge Harrison Blackwood III presided from his elevated bench like a king surveying his subjects. At 65, he was thin and sharp-featured, with silver hair slicked back and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light as he leaned forward. His black robes seemed to amplify his authority, and his pale blue eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd spent decades believing his word was law. "I said remove it," Judge Blackwood repeated, his voice dripping with impatience. "No unauthorized decorations in my courtroom. This is a place of law, not some parade ground where you can display your trinkets." The word trinkets hit like a slap. A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery, where a mix of firefighters, veterans, and family members had gathered to support Mrs. Santos. Torres felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained steady. "Your Honor," he said, his tone respectful but unwavering, "this is not a decoration. This is the Fire Service Cross, awarded for valor in the line of duty. It represents the sacrifice of every firefighter who didn't make it home. I wear it not for myself, but in remembrance of those who gave everything." Judge Blackwood's face flushed slightly. "I don't care what it represents. In my courtroom, you follow my rules. Remove it now, or I'll hold you in contempt." Torres didn't move. His dark eyes met the judge's pale ones without flinching. "With respect, Your Honor, you may command the proceedings in this room, but you do not command this medal. It belongs to the memory of men and women who died serving their communities. That's not something I can simply take off." The tension in the room was palpable. Mrs. Santos, a small woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes, looked up from the plaintiff's table with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She'd already lost her husband. She couldn't bear to see Torres punished for defending his memory. Judge Blackwood's composure cracked visibly. His knuckles whitened as he gripped his gavel, and his voice rose to fill every corner of the courtroom. "Captain Torres, you are in direct violation of courtroom protocol. I am ordering you for the final time to remove that medal, or I will find you in contempt of court. Do you understand the consequences of defying a direct order from this bench?" Torres stood his ground, his stance widening slightly, the same posture he'd taken when facing down flames that towered 3 stories high. "Your Honor, I understand you believe you have that authority. But this medal was earned in fire and smoke, watching good people die while trying to save others. It was pinned to my chest by the families of fallen firefighters who wanted their loved ones remembered. You're not asking me to remove a piece of metal, you're asking me to dishonor their sacrifice." The judge's face turned a deeper shade of red. "Your heroics are irrelevant here. This is about respect for the court, respect for the law, and respect for my authority as a sitting judge. Your military pageantry has no place in these proceedings." "Military pageantry?" Torres repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge for the first time. Your Honor, I've pulled children from burning cars. I've performed CPR on victims until my ribs cracked from the compressions. I've held dying men in my arms while their families waited outside, praying for miracles that never came. This medal doesn't represent pageantry, it represents the worst day of my life, when I had to choose between my own safety and the lives of 17 strangers trapped in a collapsing building. The gallery stirred restlessly. In the third row, Fire Chief Robert Murphy, a mountain of a man with silver hair and hands scarred from decades of service, leaned forward in his seat. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cords. Beside him, several off-duty firefighters in civilian clothes exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Judge Blackwood seemed to sense he was losing control of his courtroom, which only fueled his anger. Your personal history is not on trial here, Captain. Your obedience to lawful authority is. I'm giving you 30 seconds to comply with my order, or I will issue a warrant for your arrest on charges of contempt. Bailiff Martinez, prepare the restraints. Bailiff Elena Martinez, a veteran court officer with 20 years of service, hesitated. She'd seen plenty of contempt cases, but this felt different. Her hand moved toward her handcuffs, then stopped. She looked at Torres, then at the judge, her expression conflicted. Torres noticed her hesitation and gave her a slight nod, not of defiance, but of understanding. Bailiff Martinez is just doing her job, Your Honor. But I want to be clear about what's happening here. You're threatening to arrest a decorated firefighter for wearing a medal awarded by the families of the dead. You're criminalizing the memory of public servants who died protecting your community. The judge's voice cracked with fury. I am upholding the dignity of this court. You are disrupting legal proceedings with your grandstanding. No, Your Honor, Torres replied, his voice growing stronger. I'm standing here quietly, harming no one, disrupting nothing. The only disruption in this room is coming from that bench. You're the one shouting. You're the one making threats. You're the one who decided that honoring fallen heroes was somehow offensive to your sensibilities. A woman in the gallery, Mrs. Santos, slowly rose to her feet. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the charged silence, everyone heard her. My husband died wearing a uniform just like that. He died trying to save people he'd never met. If you take that medal away from Captain Torres, you're taking away the last piece of honor my Carlos had left. Judge Blackwood pointed his gavel at her. Sit down, ma'am, or you'll join him in contempt. But Mrs. Santos didn't sit. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded flag, the one that had covered her husband's coffin. She held it against her chest and remained standing. The sight of Maria Santos clutching her husband's flag acted like a spark in a powder keg. From the back of the courtroom, a voice boomed with the authority of decades in uniform. Your Honor, with all due respect, you're out of line. Every head turned to see Colonel James Patterson, retired Army, rising slowly from the gallery's back row. At 73, he moved with the deliberate precision of a man who'd commanded troops in 3 theaters of war. His civilian suit couldn't hide the military bearing, and his weathered hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from barely contained rage. Colonel, you will sit down immediately, Judge Blackwood snapped, but Patterson continued speaking as if he hadn't heard. I served 35 years in the United States Army. I've seen men die for causes they believed in, and I've seen others live their entire lives trying to prove they were worthy of coming home when their brothers didn't. That fire captain standing before you isn't displaying a trinket or disrupting your court. He's carrying the weight of every person he couldn't save, every family he had to face with bad news, every funeral where he folded a flag just like the one that brave woman is holding. Judge Blackwood hammered his gavel repeatedly. Colonel Patterson, you are in contempt. Bailiff, arrest this man. But Bailiff Martinez still hadn't moved. She stood frozen, her hand hovering over her equipment, looking between the judge and the growing crowd of people who were now standing in solidarity. Colonel Patterson wasn't finished. You want to talk about respect, Judge? Let me tell you about respect. Respect is earned by service, sacrifice, and putting others before yourself. That medal on Captain Torres's chest wasn't given to him by politicians or bureaucrats, it was earned in fire and blood, witnessed by the people whose lives he saved. You don't get to diminish that because it offends your sense of protocol. Another voice joined in from the middle section. He's right. Fire Lieutenant Sarah Chen, still in her work uniform from the morning shift, stood with her helmet tucked under her arm. Your Honor, I was there the day Captain Torres earned that medal. I watched him go back into that building 4 times when everyone else, including me, thought it was too dangerous. He saved 6 people that day, a grandmother, 2 kids, a disabled veteran, and 2 construction workers. The building collapsed 15 minutes after he brought out the last victim. You're not just asking him to remove a medal, you're asking him to forget the faces of the people who are alive today because of his courage. The gallery was transforming before everyone's eyes. What had begun as a quiet legal proceeding was becoming something unprecedented. More people stood, not just firefighters and veterans, but ordinary citizens who understood they were witnessing something historic. In the 4th row, Angela Rodriguez, a school teacher, rose with tears streaming down her face. My daughter was one of those children, she said, her voice breaking. She was 8 years old when that warehouse caught fire during her school field trip. Captain Torres carried her out in his arms. She's 15 now, and she wants to be a firefighter because of him. How dare you try to erase that heroism? Judge Blackwood was now visibly sweating, his carefully styled hair beginning to show dampness at the temples. He looked around the courtroom as if seeing it for the first time, rows of people standing in defiant silence, their faces showing not disrespect for the law, but disgust for his interpretation of it. This is a disruption of legal proceedings, he shouted, his voice cracking. Everyone sit down immediately, or I'll clear this entire courtroom. Nobody moved. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then, from the front row, an elderly woman slowly stood. Rose Martinez, no relation to the bailiff, was 86 years old and the grandmother of a firefighter who died in the line of duty 5 years earlier. She moved with the careful dignity of age, her arthritis making each movement deliberate. In her hands, she held a photograph of her grandson in his dress uniform. Judge, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades, my grandson Pablo died trying to save a family from a house fire. He was 24 years old, married just 6 months, with his whole life ahead of him. The last thing he said to his wife was that he had to go help people. When they brought his body out, he was still holding a little girl he tried to protect. She didn't make it either, but he tried. That's what that medal means. It means trying when everyone else has given up. It means running toward danger when everyone else runs away. It means being willing to die for strangers because that's what good people do. She held up the photograph so everyone could see it. You want Captain Torres to take off that medal? Fine. But first, you look at this picture of my Pablo. You look at his face and you tell me his sacrifice doesn't deserve to be remembered. You tell me that honoring his memory is somehow disrespectful to your court. Judge Blackwood stared at the photograph, his mouth opening and closing without sound. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he'd started. But pride and authority, once threatened, rarely yield to wisdom. The courtroom had become a cathedral of defiance. Every person standing represented not just themselves, but the memory of someone who had served, someone who had sacrificed, someone who had died in service to others. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of purpose, heavy with the weight of collective moral authority that no gavel could break. Judge Blackwood's hand shook as he raised his gavel again. I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus. Bailiff Martinez, I am ordering you to arrest Captain Torres immediately for contempt of court. If you refuse, I'll have you charged with dereliction of duty. Bailiff Martinez finally spoke, her voice steady despite the impossible position she'd been placed in. Your Honor, with respect, I took an oath to uphold justice and protect the innocent. I don't see how arresting a decorated firefighter for wearing a medal earned in service to his community serves either purpose. The judge's composure shattered completely. You're all in contempt. Every single person standing in this courtroom is in contempt. I'll have you all arrested. That's when Captain Torres stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Your Honor, stop. The simple command, delivered with quiet authority, brought silence back to the room. Torres took another step closer to the bench, his hands still clasped behind his back, his posture respectful but unafraid. You want to know about respect? Let me tell you what I've learned about respect in 22 years of service. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. It's not about the power you hold over others, it's about how you use that power to serve something greater than yourself. He gestured toward the standing crowd. Every person in this room understands that. They've seen real authority, the kind that comes from sacrifice, from putting others first, from being willing to pay the ultimate price for strangers. That's why they're standing. Not because they don't respect the law, but because they recognize the difference between authority and authoritarianism. Judge Blackwood's face was now purple with rage. How dare you lecture me about authority? I am a sitting judge. I have the power to destroy your life. Torres nodded slowly. You do have that power, Your Honor. And how you choose to use it will define who you are long after this moment passes. My career, my life, was built on running toward danger when others ran away. I've been burned, cut, beaten by falling debris, and poisoned by smoke more times than I can count. I've been threatened by criminals, cursed by people I was trying to help, and blamed for tragedies I couldn't prevent. But I've never been afraid of a man who mistakes his position for his worth. The captain's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the room. You see, Your Honor, my career wasn't built in courtrooms or boardrooms. It was forged in burning buildings, on accident scenes, in the homes of grieving families who needed someone to tell them their loved ones didn't die in vain. Every promotion I earned came from the trust of people who knew I'd risk my life for theirs. Every commendation was signed in smoke and sealed with tears. He touched the medal on his chest with one finger. This cross wasn't awarded by politicians or bureaucrats. It was given to me by the families of the people I saved, and the families of the people I couldn't save. Mrs. Chen, whose daughter I carried out of that warehouse fire, she pinned this on my uniform. Mr. Rodriguez, whose son didn't make it out in time, he shook my hand and told me to wear it for all the ones who couldn't come home. You think you can order me to remove it? You don't have that authority. No one does. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Blackwood gripped his gavel so tightly his knuckles went white, but for the first time, he seemed to understand he was facing something bigger than his jurisdiction. Torres continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear him. Your Honor, you can hold me in contempt. You can have me arrested. You can try to destroy my career and my reputation. But you cannot make me dishonor the memory of heroes. You cannot make me betray the trust of families who lost everything so that others could live. And you cannot make me pretend that your authority is more important than their sacrifice. A sound began to build in the courtroom, not applause, but something deeper. It was the sound of people drawing breath together, of hearts beating in rhythm, of souls recognizing truth when they heard it. It was the sound of respect being earned in real time. And then Captain Torres delivered the words that would end a career, Your Honor, your legacy will be written by this moment. You can be remembered as the judge who understood that some things are sacred, or as the man who tried to criminalize heroism and failed. The choice is yours, but the consequences belong to history. What happened next changed everything. Someone in the gallery had been recording the entire exchange on their phone, not for social media glory, but because they sensed they were witnessing something historic. Within minutes of the confrontation's end, the video was uploaded with a simple caption, Judge tries to force firefighter to remove medal earned saving lives. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip spread across platforms like wildfire, shared by veterans groups, firefighter associations, teachers' unions, and ordinary citizens who recognized injustice when they saw it. Hashtag Respect the Service began trending within hours, followed by hashtag Stand with Torres and hashtag Fire Judge Blackwood. The video accumulated millions of views in its first day, with comments pouring in from around the world. My father died in 9/11. He was FDNY. Seeing this judge disrespect what our heroes represent makes me sick. Sarah M., New York. I'm a retired police officer. Politics aside, you don't dishonor the sacrifice of public servants. Period. Mike R., Texas. This firefighter has more dignity in his little finger than that judge has in his entire body. Elena P., California. But the real power came from the organized response. The International Association of Fire Chiefs issued a statement within 24 hours. Captain Torres represents the finest traditions of the fire service. Any attempt to diminish the significance of Valor awards earned through life-risking service is an attack on all who serve. The veterans of foreign wars followed suit. While Captain Torres serves in civilian emergency services, his commitment to protecting others embodies the same sacrifice we recognize in military service. Judge Blackwood's actions are a disgrace to the memory of all who have died serving their communities. Gold Star families, those who had lost loved ones in military service, began sharing their own stories, drawing parallels between Torres's stand and their own fights for recognition and respect. The movement transcended professional boundaries, becoming a broader statement about honor, sacrifice, and the abuse of authority. Media outlets picked up the story with the hunger that comes when a simple narrative captures complex truths. CNN ran segments featuring interviews with the families Torres had helped save. Fox News hosted debates about judicial overreach. Local stations across the country interviewed their own firefighters, police officers, and EMTs about what the medals and commendations meant to them. But perhaps the most powerful response came from an unexpected source: other judges. Judge Patricia Williams of the Superior Court of California issued a rare public statement: the judiciary derives its authority from the respect of the people it serves. When that authority is used to diminish rather than protect the honor of public servants, it undermines the very foundation of our legal system. More than 30 judges across the country signed on to similar statements, creating an unprecedented professional rebuke of a sitting colleague. The message was clear: Judge Blackwood had crossed a line that the legal community itself would not tolerate. The political response was swift and bipartisan. State legislators began drafting bills to protect the display of Valor awards in all government buildings, including courtrooms. City councils passed resolutions honoring Captain Torres and condemning the judge's actions. The governor of the state where the incident occurred called for a formal investigation into Judge Blackwood's conduct. Within a week, the pressure became unbearable. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse daily, not angry mobs, but quiet vigils of firefighters, veterans, and citizens holding signs that read, "Honor the Fallen," and "Respect Service." They said nothing, did nothing disruptive, but their presence spoke volumes about the community's loss of faith in their judicial system. The local bar association, initially reluctant to criticize a sitting judge, finally issued a statement calling for Blackwood's resignation. Legal scholars wrote op-eds about the difference between judicial authority and judicial tyranny. Law schools began using the incident as a case study in the abuse of power. Judge Blackwood tried to weather the storm. He issued a statement through his attorney claiming his actions were necessary to maintain courtroom decorum and that the response was overblown. He insisted he had nothing against firefighters or veterans, but was simply enforcing standard courtroom protocols. The explanation satisfied no one. Court records showed that Blackwood had regularly allowed attorneys to wear flag pins, military tie clips, and other symbolic items in his courtroom. The selective enforcement of his protocol became another piece of evidence that his actions were personal, not procedural. The final blow came from an unexpected source: Mrs. Maria Santos, the widow whose benefits hearing had been overshadowed by the medal controversy. She held a press conference outside the courthouse, flanked by Captain Torres and dozens of other firefighters. "Judge Blackwood turned my husband's memorial into a circus," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Carlos died serving this community, and Captain Torres was there to honor that service. Instead of justice for my family, we got a judge who was more concerned with his own ego than with doing what's right. How can I trust a system that attacks the very heroes it should protect?" Her words crystallized what millions had been feeling. This wasn't just about one judge or one firefighter. It was about whether institutions designed to serve the people could be trusted when they were led by people who had forgotten their purpose. 10 days after the confrontation, Judge Harrison Blackwood III announced his immediate resignation from the bench, citing irreconcilable differences with public expectations. His 30-year career ended not in scandal or corruption, but in a fundamental failure to understand the difference between power and authority. Captain Michael Torres returned to Station 19 the morning after Judge Blackwood's resignation was announced. He arrived early, as was his habit, and found the firehouse already buzzing with activity. His crew had prepared breakfast, a tradition reserved for special occasions and homecomings. "Captain," said Lieutenant Sarah Chen, grinning as she poured coffee, "you know you're famous now, right? My 8-year-old daughter asked me if she could meet the metal man she saw on TV." Torres accepted the coffee with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Fame had never been the point, and he struggled with the attention. "I just did what anyone in this room would have done. You don't dishonor the fallen to appease the living." The firehouse walls told the real story of what mattered. Photos of fallen firefighters lined the memorial corridor, men and women who had died in the line of duty, their faces forever young, their sacrifice forever remembered. Among them was Lieutenant Carlos Santos, Torres's former partner and Maria Santos's husband. It was Carlos's photo that Torres had been thinking about when he stood in that courtroom, refusing to remove his medal. The broader impact of the confrontation continued to ripple outward. The video had sparked conversations in firehouses, police stations, and military bases across the country about the meaning of service and the importance of institutional respect for those who serve. Training academies began using the incident as a case study in leadership and moral courage. More importantly, it had changed how communities viewed their first responders. Fire departments reported increased volunteerism, police departments saw more community engagement, and veterans organizations experienced a surge in support and membership. Sometimes, it takes a moment of injustice to remind people what justice actually looks like. Mrs. Maria Santos eventually won her benefits case with a new judge who understood that respect for service families was not negotiable. She used her first payment to establish a scholarship fund for the children of fallen firefighters, naming it the Carlos Santos Memorial Fund. Captain Torres served on the selection committee, ensuring that the money went to young people who embodied the same spirit of service their parents had died protecting. Judge Blackwood's replacement, Judge Rebecca Martinez, a former military lawyer who understood the weight of service, made her first official act the implementation of new protocols specifically protecting the display of Valor awards and service medals in her courtroom. The protocols were adopted statewide within 6 months. As Torres sat in the firehouse kitchen that morning, watching his crew prepare for another day of serving their community, he reflected on what the confrontation had really been about. It wasn't about a medal or a courtroom or even a judge's career. It was about the fundamental question of what a society owes to those who risk everything to protect it. The fire service cross still gleamed on his dress uniform, hanging in his locker. Tomorrow, he would wear it again to another funeral, another fallen hero, another grieving family, another reminder that the price of service is always paid in full by those brave enough to answer the call. True honor, Torres had learned, doesn't require permission from authority. It stands firm in the face of power, speaks truth in moments of pressure, and never forgets that some things are more important than comfort, career, or convenience. Before we end this story, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what does service mean in your community? If this story moved you, please show your respect by subscribing to our channel and hitting that like button. Share your own stories of honor and service in the comments below, Every comment matters because every act of respect for those who serve makes our communities stronger. Remember, honoring heroes isn't just about the past, it's about building the future they died to protect.